Hey guys, tonight we slip quietly into a place you might never have imagined visiting. Not a museum, not a lecture hall, but a room thick with the scent of roasted goose, spiced honey cakes, and the tangy sweetness of wine pressed along the Nile. You hear the soft strum of harps vibrating against the clay walls, and torches sputter as shadows climb upward like dancers of their own. We're stepping into the party life of ancient Egyptian nobles, where wine wasn't just for drinking, it was an invitation to laugh, gossip, flirt, and sometimes to seal alliances that could change dynasties. And honestly, if you had to endure the heat of the Nile Delta wearing 3 layers of linen without air conditioning, you'd probably need a wine party too. You sure wouldn't survive long otherwise. Trust me. You'd melt faster than butter on a papyrus scroll. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And hey, let me know in the comments, where are you listening from tonight, and what time is it where you are? Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You shuffle in behind the line of servants balancing clay jars on their shoulders, and the smell of fermenting grapes curls around you like a sly whisper. The hosts greet you with practiced smiles, teeth polished, eyes lined with coals so dark you almost lose track of where gaze begins and mischief ends. This isn't just a gathering, it's a stage, and you, whether you like it or not, are part of the performance. The nobles don't want an empty room, they want witnesses. They want someone to notice the shimmer of their gold bangles, the tilt of their headdress, the way they laugh just a little too loudly at a clever remark. You find yourself sliding into a cushion on the floor. The mat is woven tightly, but you still feel the reeds beneath your elbow. The music bends toward your ears, harp strings plucked in a pattern that seems simple. But your foot taps to a rhythm that could trap you if you're not careful. Someone next to you chuckles, low and knowing. Already, the flirtation has begun. It's funny, back then, the very act of gathering in such luxury was a kind of rebellion against boredom, a declaration that life should be lived with gusto. Picture this, outside the walls, peasants grind grain in the dust. Fishermen mend nets by torchlight, and you're here, swirling a cup of imported wine. Yes, imported. Because while beer was everywhere, the everyday drink of workers, wine was rare, expensive, and made you instantly stand out. To sip it was to say, I'm special, and I want you to see that. As you breathe in the warmth of the room, a servant pours you a taste from a jar sealed with resin. It's not the sweet table wine you'd find at a modern store. It's heavy, earthy, and strong enough to make your eyelids flutter after just a few sips. No wonder the nobles got talkative. You imagine yourself trying to flirt after gulping something that tastes halfway between fruit and vinegar. It takes either confidence or desperation. But in this room, confidence is currency. There's a phrase scratched in ancient texts hinting at these parties. Nobles drank to the point of being free. Which, let's be honest, is just a polite way of saying tipsy. But for Egyptians, tipsy meant the guards lowered their shields, the rivals dropped their pretense, and laughter slipped in through cracks like the Nile water seeping through dikes. Even the most rigid official might loosen his sandals when music swelled and the wine kept flowing. The flicker of lamplight catches a woman's necklace, lapis lazuli inlaid with gold, glowing blue like bottled fragments of the night sky. She leans close to whisper something you can't catch, but the man beside her laughs so loudly his wig slips slightly out of place. Yes, wigs. Imagine flirting while constantly adjusting your hairpiece. If you thought modern dating was awkward, try managing eyeliner, linen robes, and a heavy scented wig without breaking a sweat. You're impressed they made it look easy. The musicians pick up tempo, and suddenly the room feels less like a chamber and more like a heartbeat. Your senses are flooded: clove oil on someone's wrist, roasted lamb wafting from the corner, a servant brushing past with the faint rustle of papyrus slippers. Your own head tilts, heavy already, as you realize this isn't just a feast, it's an atmosphere meticulously designed to bend you toward pleasure. Every detail, from the carved lotus pillars to the cool water splashed across the floor to settle dust, is meant to cradle you into surrender. And there's the strange thing: while these parties might sound light-hearted, they carried weight. To be invited meant you were part of the circle. To be excluded meant you were fading, politically or socially. You glance around and notice who's at the center and who hovers at the edges. The closer you sit to the host, the more your words will carry tomorrow. Wine wasn't just for fun. It was a ladder, slippery as it was, and everyone wanted to climb. Somewhere in the corner, a guest raises a toast, an awkward balancing act, since the clay goblets are wide-mouthed and heavy. He says something about prosperity, the gods, and everlasting joy, and everyone cheers as though they actually believe him. Yet you catch the quick flick of someone's eyes, a rival across the room, calculating just how everlasting this joy will be if the next harvest fails. Historians still argue over whether these parties were more about genuine leisure or subtle power plays. Probably both. That's the beauty of it: truth and performance, poured together into the same cup. And here you sit, heartbeat syncing with the drum, wine coating your tongue, eyes drifting across jewels that shine brighter than the stars outside. You didn't just stumble into a gathering, you've been drawn into a world where laughter hides strategy, where every flirt is a gamble, and where even the shadows in the corner seem to wink with secrets. The clay goblet still feels heavy in your hand, and as you tilt it back you can't help but notice the way the wine clings to the rim, dark as polished pomegranate seeds. You wonder where all this wine comes from, because, let's be honest, the Nile Delta isn't exactly Napa Valley. And yet, in the world of ancient Egypt, grapevines were coaxed to grow along the rich soils near the river, tended carefully by laborers who probably never got to taste the fruit of their work. You sip again, and suddenly you realize this liquid swirling inside your cup isn't just a drink, it's a status symbol, a calling card that whispers, "I belong." Wine in Egypt was never the commoner's friend. For the everyday worker, beer was the comfort, thick, filling, and nutritious in its own way. It kept the stomach satisfied, the body hydrated, and spirits steady. But beer didn't glitter in the lamplight. Beer didn't perfume the air with the promise of luxury. Wine, rare and costly, became the thing that nobles flaunted like a new sports car parked conspicuously in the driveway. You can almost hear them bragging, "Oh, this one's from a vineyard near Memphis. Finest batch of the season." The truth, though, is more fascinating than the bragging. Egyptians had learned the art of viticulture from their neighbors. Contacts with the Levant and trade with places like Canaan helped bring in different techniques. Some jars even carried resin and spices to mask imperfections in the fermentation process. So yes, when you sip from your cup, you're tasting not just the Nile soil but also centuries of experimentation, trade routes, and a bit of ancient chemistry. The jars are hefty, amphories sealed with mud stoppers. Servants chip them open with practiced motions, and when the aroma spills out, the nobles lean in as if inhaling a secret. You notice that the wine isn't clear, it's cloudy, sometimes reddish, sometimes leaning toward brown, depending on the batch. And yet no one here cares about clarity. What matters is that it flows, plentiful and intoxicating. The stronger the better. One inscription even jokes about wine being a window to the heart. though, judging from the wobbling gait of the man 2 cushions away, it's also a window straight to the floor. You glance toward the corner, where painted murals depict harvest scenes, men climbing ladders to snip heavy grape clusters, women trampling them in large vats, the juice running like crimson streams into jars. It's all very romantic on the wall, but you can imagine the sticky feet, the swarms of flies, the back-breaking labor. You can't help but chuckle. Next time someone complains about their office job, picture stomping grapes under a blazing Egyptian sun. HR wouldn't cover those blisters. Yet in this candlelit chamber, wine is polished into poetry. A guest leans closer to you, lowering his voice as though confiding a great truth. This vintage will keep your heart light, even when the gods turn heavy. His breath smells as fermented as his words, but you nod because in this room the right response is always agreement. And maybe there's wisdom buried in his slurred phrasing. After all, wine was seen as a gift from Osiris, the god of fertility and renewal. To drink it was to taste life itself, renewed each season. There's a peculiar custom, though, the more wine a host provided, the more generous and powerful they appeared. Lavishness wasn't just admired, it was expected. And so, while you sip cautiously, the servants keep refilling your goblet to the brim. You realize you're caught in a cycle: drink, nod, smile, repeat. Try refusing, and you risk insulting your host. Keep drinking, and you risk waking up tomorrow wondering how your wig ended up on someone else's lap. Some historians still debate just how much wine flowed at these gatherings. Was it really as constant as the text suggests, or is that the exaggeration of poets painting a gilded picture? The jars excavated from tombs suggest the nobles weren't exaggerating too much. There was enough stored to keep entire households tipsy for weeks. You imagine archaeologists uncorking a jar thousands of years later and grimacing at the sludge inside. Not exactly something you'd want with your cheese platter today. The mood in the room shifts as the wine loosens tongues. Conversations grow louder, punctuated by laughter that feels just a bit too forced. A noblewoman waves her goblet in wide arcs, nearly baptizing her neighbor's wig in fermented grape. Servants dart quickly, catching drips with linen cloths, all while keeping their faces as expressionless as statues. They've mastered the art of invisibility. Your own head feels lighter now. The cushions seem softer, the gold ornaments brighter, and the hum of the harp strings deeper, as though tugging directly at your chest. That's the trick of the wine. It doesn't just numb, it heightens. You notice details you missed before: the faint carving on your cup, a lotus flower etched into the clay, the way the torchlight paints everyone's cheeks with a ruddy glow. And then, the strangest thought crosses your mind. You realize you're tasting not just a drink but an entire social hierarchy. Every drop reminds you that you're seated among Egypt's elite, that your place here, whether at the center or edge, defines your worth. It's intoxicating, and not just because of the alcohol. Wine is liquid status, and tonight you're swimming in it. But as you set down the goblet, something else catches your attention. The harpist begins a new song, slower this time, with notes stretching long and languid, like shadows at dusk. Around you, guests sway gently, lips curving into lazy smiles. You realize the party is only just beginning, and the wine is merely the first act. The harpist's fingers glide slower now, the strings humming like distant bees, and then, suddenly, the tempo changes. Drums join in, low and steady, like a second heartbeat inside your ribs. You shift on the cushion, the clay goblet warm in your hand, and your eyes drift toward the center of the room where the real entertainment begins. 2 dancers step forward, their linen skirts swirling just above their ankles, bare feet tracing delicate patterns on the packed floor. Their arms rise, bending like reeds in the river breeze, wrists snapping in sharp turns that catch the torchlight in quick flashes. You can almost feel the music in your bones, each movement stitched to the rhythm with uncanny precision. A servant nearby whispers that these are professional performers, hired not just to entertain but to set the mood, flirtation, mystery, indulgence. And, well, it works. The nobles lean forward as if their lives depend on not missing a single flick of the wrist. You notice that the dancers' eyes never really rest. They slide across the crowd, playful, measuring who's watching, who dares to meet their gaze. It's not just art, it's a game, one that blurs the line between performance and invitation. You almost laugh to yourself, realizing that eye contact across the dance floor is apparently a universal human tradition, whether it's an Egyptian banquet or your local wedding reception. The instruments build. There's a sistrum shaking now, metal discs clattering like rain against bronze. The sound slices through the air, sharp yet oddly soothing. You catch yourself swaying too, shoulders moving before you've given them permission. And then, just when you think the rhythm has taken you completely, a singer joins in, chanting words that weave together praise for Hathor, the goddess of love, beauty, and joy. Of course. Who better to call upon at a party where flirting is the main sport? It's here, in the swell of sound, that you realize how deliberate this atmosphere really is. Music wasn't background noise. It was the architecture of the evening, scaffolding built to carry everyone higher into intoxication. Without it, the party would crumble into silence and awkward coughs. With it, even silence becomes charged, heavy with possibility. The nobles know this. You glance across the room and see a man tapping his fingers on his goblet, matching the drumbeat, leaning closer to a woman with a laugh that feels rehearsed. She tilts her head, coy but calculated, letting her gold earrings sway like pendulums. Is she interested? Or is it just the rhythm pulling her? Hard to tell. That's the beauty of it. Music offers cover for every move. But not everyone's enjoying it the same way. A young servant, arms full of wine jars, stumbles when the drums pound too loudly. He recovers, but you catch the look, half panic, half awe. For him, this is a world glimpsed through a keyhole, a reminder that the gods didn't pour wine evenly into everyone's cups. Still, his feet tap when he thinks no one's watching. Even the lowest rung can't resist the beat. One ancient inscription describes parties so lively that the neighbors complained of the noise of harps. You smile at the thought. Ancient Egypt had noise complaints too. Imagine the stone tablet version of a cranky neighbor yelling, "Turn it down, some of us have to work in the morning." The more things change, the more they stay the same. There's also something curious. These performances weren't always just for fun. Some dancers doubled as priestesses of Hathor, blurring sacred ritual with entertainment. To dance was to honor the goddess, to channel her joy. You sip again, realizing that while this all feels like indulgence, it's also devotion in disguise. Historians still argue about where that line truly was. Were these women entertainers, or conduits for the divine? Maybe both. Maybe that's why the crowd watches so intently, as if one misstep could offend not just the hosts but the gods themselves. The singer's voice rises higher, carrying above the crowd. You don't understand the words, not exactly, but the tone makes you feel something ancient pressing against your skin. A swell of laughter breaks out behind you, someone attempting to echo the song in a comically exaggerated falsetto. The room bursts into giggles, even the dancers suppressing smiles as they spin. Humor slides easily into the night air, woven into the rhythm like a hidden thread. And just when you think it can't get more intoxicating, the dancers beckon the guests. A nobleman stands, his robe slipping from one shoulder, as he clumsily imitates the motions. His friends clap, some too loudly, while others shout encouragements that sound suspiciously like gentle mockery. You can't help but laugh too. It's the same energy as karaoke night at a dive bar, ancient edition. Everyone loves to watch someone else make a fool of themselves, as long as it's done with charm. By now, the wine, the rhythm, and the laughter have blurred into something inseparable. You realize that this is how these nobles kept boredom at bay, by making life a performance, by turning ordinary nights into spectacles. Every beat, every glance, every sip of wine is part of the script. You feel yourself sliding into that script too, your body warmer, your head lighter, your laughter ready to spill. But before you get too comfortable, another wave of servants enters, balancing trays piled high with food shimmering in the torchlight. The music softens, just enough to let conversation flow back into the air. Your stomach growls, and you realize the next act of this play is about to unfold, not on the dance floor, but on the banquet table. The smell hits you before the sight does, rich, savory, and slightly sweet, the kind of aroma that clings to the back of your throat and makes your stomach lurch forward with impatience. The servants set the trays down with quick, fluid motions, and suddenly the room is no longer just music and laughter, it's a carnival of food. You lean closer, eyes wide, as the banquet unfolds before you. The first thing you notice is the roasted goose, skin crackling and lacquered with honey. The torchlight makes it gleam as if it's been gilded, a centerpiece meant to dazzle as much as to feed. Nearby, baskets overflow with flatbreads brushed with oil and dusted with coriander, while bowls of dates and figs glisten like polished jewels. There's cheese, too, crumbly, sharp, and slightly sour, a reminder that dairy was a rare indulgence for nobles who could afford the luxury of herding cattle not just for labor, but for milk. You take in the spread with something like awe. This isn't your everyday Egyptian meal of onions, lentils, and bread baked in simple ovens. This is excess in edible form. You catch the buttery sheen of Nile perch, grilled and garnished with herbs that smell faintly of dill. A servant balances a tray of quail eggs, their shells painted with streaks of spice. And in the corner, you spot a platter of honey cakes, sticky enough to glue your fingers together for the rest of the night. You almost laugh at yourself. Modern buffets look sad in comparison, wilted lettuce leaves and lukewarm pasta. But it's not just the dishes, it's the symbolism. Each item is a statement, a silent announcement of wealth. To serve goose meant you had access to the river marshes and the labor to hunt, pluck, and roast. To serve fresh fruit meant your storage jars and trade networks kept rot at bay. Even the spices spoke volumes. Cinnamon and myrrh, carried from lands far beyond Egypt's borders, shimmered on the table like edible status symbols. Eating here isn't just about filling your belly. It's about reminding everyone that you can afford to eat better than the gods themselves. The guests waste no time. Fingers reach, breaking bread, scooping fish, dipping chunks into bowls of lentils seasoned with garlic. You join in, tearing a piece of bread and dragging it through a spread that tastes sharp with leeks and salt. The texture is rough, earthy, yet softened by the drizzle of honey laid across it. Each bite feels like a contradiction, heavy and filling, yet spiced enough to make you crave the next one. Someone nearby makes a joke about the goose being fatter than the vizier's purse, and laughter bubbles across the room. Another adds that the honey cakes are too sweet, like a lover who won't leave you alone. The humor is sharp, but it's playful, like seasoning sprinkled on the feast. You find yourself chuckling too, though you're mostly focused on the way the quail eggs burst in your mouth like tiny fireworks. A curious little detail catches your attention. Servants offer cones of perfumed fat to the guests, setting them carefully on wigs or hair. As the night warms, the cones slowly melt, releasing fragrances of myrrh and lotus, mingling with the scent of roasted meat and baked bread. It's both practical and theatrical. You smell divine while shining in the flickering torchlight, even if your head feels greasy by the end. You imagine attending a modern dinner party with butter slowly melting on your scalp and nearly choke on your bread trying not to laugh. Still, even in this abundance, there's tension. You notice a guest eyeing the fruit platter as though measuring whether he'll get a slice of pomegranate before it disappears. Another woman pushes her bread away delicately, more concerned with how she looks while eating than with actually eating. The feast is a performance too, each bite calculated, each morsel a chance to appear restrained, refined, or indulgent in exactly the right proportion. Historians still argue whether common folk ever got access to such delicacies during festivals. Some texts suggest food was shared widely at religious celebrations, while others hint that nobles guarded their goose and honey like treasures. The truth probably lies somewhere in between. Peasants might get a taste, but never the endless flow of platters you see before you now. Tonight, the nobles hoard luxury the way the desert hoards secrets. You take another bite of cheese, its tang cutting through the heaviness of meat and bread, and lean back. The harp still hums, softer now, a reminder that the music hasn't left, it's only shifted, giving food its moment on stage. And as the nobles chew, they also talk. Mouths full of bread spill secrets more easily than sober lips ever would. You hear snippets about land disputes, temple politics, and of course, flirtations woven into conversations about goose fat and figs. It occurs to you that food isn't just fuel here, it's lubricant. It softens egos, fills silences, and sweetens words that might otherwise sting. A clever host knows that with enough honey cakes, even the sharpest rivalries can be dulled, at least for the length of a banquet. You lick honey from your fingers, sticky and golden, and glance across the room. A man gestures too wildly with a chicken leg, nearly smacking his neighbor in the face, and the whole table erupts in laughter. Someone else buries his face in a loaf of bread, pretending to nap mid-bite, and the performance wins him applause. You realize then that food is part of the entertainment, both a prop and a player in the night's drama. And just as you lean back, full and warm, you catch sight of the next layer of the party. Beyond the platters, beyond the bread and honey, the sparkle of gold draws your eyes to the guests themselves. Their jewelry, their wigs, their perfumes. You've filled your stomach, but now you're about to feast with your eyes. The feast has settled into your stomach like a warm stone, and as you lean back against the cushion, your gaze drifts from the tables to the people themselves. It's not the food that steals the show now, it's the glittering parade of fabrics, jewels, and scents that make the entire room shimmer like a living treasure chest. The first thing you notice are the wigs. Nearly everyone here wears one, carefully oiled and styled, thick black locks cascading over shoulders in glossy waves. Some are simple, but others are sculpted into braids, curls, and heavy layers pinned in place with gold clasps. A servant passes by with a small ivory comb tucked into his belt, ready to rescue any noble whose wig dares to slip under the weight of wine and heat. You imagine the modern equivalent of showing up to a dinner party with a full designer hairstyle, except instead of hairspray, it's beeswax. Practical, yes. Comfortable? Not so much. Your eyes slide to the linen garments, impossibly white in the flickering torchlight. The fabric clings lightly, sheer enough to catch every curve and line, a deliberate tease of wealth and sensuality. Some nobles wear pleated skirts stiffened with starch, edges sharp as papyrus reeds, while others drape themselves in flowing robes. And always, there's jewelry to draw the eye. Wide collars studded with turquoise and carnelian, bangles stacked up to elbows, rings flashing with each gesture. Even the smallest nod or turn of the wrist becomes a performance of wealth. The air grows heavier with perfume. You breathe in myrrh, cinnamon, and lotus, mingling with the roasted goose and honey cakes still lingering in the air. Perfume isn't just fragrance here, it's armor. To arrive without it would be like showing up today without brushing your teeth. Nobles believed scent elevated them closer to the divine, keeping rot and evil spirits at bay. You almost laugh, wondering how many modern deodorant commercials owe their spirit to ancient Egypt. And then you notice the cones again, those little lumps of perfumed fat balanced on wigs. Slowly melting, they send rivulets of fragrance down black hair until the entire room is awash in sweetness. You can't decide if it's luxurious or just messy, but as you watch a guest tilt her head, smiling while the scent drips around her shoulders, you realize it's both. Luxury is rarely practical. A noblewoman across the room catches your attention. She wears a collar so wide it almost touches her shoulders, each stone carved into precise petals. When she leans forward to whisper, the collar flashes, drawing every eye whether she wants it or not. Her bracelets jangle with each laugh, a percussion to the harp still humming in the corner. You notice the way the man beside her watches the shimmer of her jewelry more than her lips. Maybe that's the point. Maybe in this room, seduction begins not with words but with gold. There's humor in it, too. A nobleman rises, clearly proud of the leopard-skin sash tied across his chest, only for his wig cone to slip sideways, dripping fat down his ear. His neighbor snickers behind his goblet, and soon the whole group is suppressing chuckles. You nearly choke on your own laughter. Imagine trying to look regal while scented grease trails down your jawline. But beneath the comedy, you sense something deeper. Appearances here are everything. Clothes and jewels are not just decoration, they're language. They say, I can afford to be beautiful, I belong to this circle, I am worthy of your attention. In fact, inscriptions suggest that many nobles left detailed instructions for their tomb art, demanding to be shown in the finest linen and brightest jewelry. Even in death, fashion was immortality. Some historians still argue over just how widespread this obsession was. Did every noble really swan about dripping in turquoise and gold, or is that an exaggeration of tomb paintings designed to flatter the dead? The truth is probably somewhere in between. But looking around this room, you'd believe the paintings were modest compared to reality. You run your fingers over your own linen sleeve, simple compared to the jeweled arms beside you, and you feel the subtle pressure of it. The entire party is a runway, and everyone is a model. To look plain is to vanish. To shine is to survive. And as the torches sputter higher, making the gold shimmer like trapped sunlight, you realize that this feast is no longer about the food or the wine. It's about the spectacle. The harp changes again, lighter this time, playful. Guests lean closer, voices softer, laughter pitched in delicate bursts. You see glances exchanged, brief, electric, charged. A tilt of the head here, a flicker of a smile there. All this glitter and perfume isn't just for display, it's bait. And you, caught in the soft glow of torches and the swirl of perfumes, are about to watch how nobles in ancient Egypt mastered the subtle art of flirting. The laughter around you softens, the harp plucking turns sly, and suddenly the room feels like it has shrunk. Not in size, but in focus, like every eye is sharpening, every gesture leaning in. The food and jewels were the prologue. Now the real performance begins, the delicate game of flirtation. You notice it first in the glances. Quick, darting, almost invisible unless you know to look. A woman across the cushions flicks her gaze toward a man, then drops it back to her goblet so fast you might think it was a trick of the torchlight. But then, there it is again, longer this time, paired with the faintest tilt of her lips. He laughs a little louder than necessary at something someone else says, as though signaling back. This isn't clumsy or loud, it's a chess match played with eyelids. The conversations, too, are layered. On the surface, it's harmless chatter about vineyards or goose roasts. But beneath the words, a different script is running. Compliments masked as jokes, jokes dipped in compliments. This wine is almost as sweet as your smile. A man quips, and the group chuckles politely. You hear the woman reply. Then I hope the jars never run dry. It's banter, but the undercurrent is unmistakable. You can't help but grin. Ancient pickup lines weren't all that different from modern ones, just with more references to agriculture. And then there are the gestures. A hand brushing a sleeve too lightly to be accidental. A laugh paired with a lean, closing the space just enough to suggest intent. You realize this whole room is alive with signals, subtle as papyrus whispers. Some guests are bold, leaning fully into one another, while others play coy, teasing with retreat before returning again. The rhythm of flirtation matches the rhythm of the drums still pulsing low in the background. The perfume cones, melting slowly, add to the game. A nobleman gestures widely, releasing a fresh waft of lotus that drifts toward the woman beside him. She inhales deliberately, then leans closer as if to say, "Yes, I notice." It's almost comical. Imagine flirting by sharing your scented scalp sweat. And yet, in this room, it feels like part of the choreography. Humor bubbles up constantly. One guest jokes about needing a second goblet. One for wine, one for courage. Another teases that his neighbor's laugh is louder than the harp, earning a playful swat of a fan. The laughter breaks tension, weaving comfort into the charged atmosphere. You realize that joking, teasing, even mocking lightly, it's all part of the ritual. Flirtation works better with laughter echoing behind it. Historians still debate how much of this was genuine romance, and how much was calculated. Were these nobles really swept away by attraction, or were they performing affection to build alliances, secure patronage, or embarrass rivals? Maybe both. Maybe that's why the gestures are so subtle. It's safer to mask your move in a joke than to lay your heart bare. You glance toward the musicians, and it hits you, they're accomplices in this dance. They raise the tempo when laughter swells, soften it when whispers spread, as if guiding the flirtation without ever stepping into it. The whole room is tuned like an instrument, every glance and laugh part of the composition. Then there's the wine, oh, the wine. Goblets are emptied and refilled with relentless devotion, and each refill loosens the inhibitions just a little more. You watch as a nobleman stumbles mid-sentence, steadies himself, and then turns it into a joke. See? Even the floor is leaning closer to you. His audience roars with laughter, but you know the wine has tilted his world more than the floor ever could. It's strange. You feel almost like a voyeur, yet also a participant. The laughter tugs at your own lips, the glances draw your own eyes. You realize that in this room, everyone is part of the game, whether you're flirting directly or simply keeping score. The air is thick, sweet with wine and perfume, charged with possibilities that might dissolve by morning but feel electric now. You lean back, smiling at the absurdity and the elegance all at once. Who knew that thousands of years ago, people were raising eyebrows, trading jokes, and pretending not to notice when they absolutely noticed? You think about the way modern parties work, the same nervous laughter, the same playful touches, the same uncertainty. It's oddly comforting. Time moves on, but the games of the heart stay stubbornly the same. And just as the laughter grows brighter, a servant enters with a basket of lotus blossoms, and the room shifts again. Guests pluck the flowers, spinning them playfully, some tucking them behind their ears, others tossing them across the cushions. The flirtation is about to transform into something more overt. Games where everyone's attention is demanded, where every glance becomes a wager. The basket of lotus blossoms rustles as servants pass it around, and suddenly the atmosphere sharpens. The playful glances and whispered jokes of a moment ago aren't enough anymore. It's time for games, the kind of party amusements that let nobles laugh louder, flirt bolder, and show off their wit in front of everyone else. The first game is simple but surprisingly tense, the lotus toss. Each guest plucks a blossom from the basket, stems slick with water, petals still glistening from the Nile. The rules? Toss the lotus into someone else's goblet. If you land it, the person must drain the cup. If you miss, well, everyone gets to laugh at your terrible aim. It sounds harmless, but in a room fueled by pride, wine, and flirtation, even a flower toss becomes a stage for ego and affection. You watch as a noblewoman lifts her wrist, balancing the blossom like an archer about to loose an arrow. Her eyes dart across the room before fixing on a man leaning lazily against his cushion. She flicks her wrist, perfect arc, perfect splash, petals bobbing in his cup. The room cheers, and he grins as he downs the goblet in one go. When he looks up again, he's staring straight at her, his smile wide, his intent clearer than the wine in his cup. Subtle? Not anymore. Your turn comes. You grip the stem, heart racing far more than it should for such a simple game. The blossom feels slippery, traitorous, but you toss anyway. It sails awkwardly, misses by a wide stretch, and lands in someone's lap instead of their goblet. The table erupts in laughter, the kind that's just shy of cruel. Someone pats your shoulder and jokes. The lotus prefers love, not clumsiness. You laugh along, cheeks warm, because here ridicule is part of the fun. And besides, missing just makes you memorable. The games don't stop there. Dice clatter on polished trays, made of carved bone, rolling as nobles bet not with coins but with dares. If I win, one man says with a smirk, you must recite a poem. If he loses, the forfeit is to sing, badly, until everyone begs him to stop. You watch as laughter ricochets through the room, wine making the losers bold and the winners smug. Another round involves riddles. A guest clears his throat and declares, "What is sweet yet bitter, fleeting yet eternal?" The room hums with guesses, love, youth, even wine itself. Someone shouts, "Goose fat!" and the room howls, though no one thinks that's the right answer. Eventually the riddle master grins and announces, "A kiss." Groans and cheers mingle, and you can feel how even intellectual games twist toward romance when the wine flows freely. You notice something odd, though. The servants play their own quiet roles in these games. They refill cups strategically, making sure that rivals across the room get more wine than friends. They smile faintly at the boldest jokes, pass notes, folded in napkins, even, accidentally, drop hints about who is admiring whom. Their invisibility makes them powerful. You realize they're not just shadows in the room, they're the stagehands pulling the ropes while the nobles prance around in the spotlight. And then, as the night grows bolder, the games take on a sharper edge. Someone suggests wagers, not of gold, but of promises. "If I land the lotus in your goblet," a man says, holding the flower with exaggerated flair, "you'll grant me a walk in the gardens tomorrow." Gasps ripple through the crowd. This isn't just playful anymore, this is risk. He tosses, the lotus arcs, and splash, straight into her cup. She blushes, sips, and nods ever so slightly. The room erupts in knowing laughter, half mockery, half applause. Historians still argue about whether these party games were truly light-hearted or veiled negotiations of power and desire. Were the wagers just dares, or contracts in disguise? Did a lotus toss decide nothing, or everything? The truth may never be clear, but in this torchlit room, it feels as though entire futures balance on the spin of a blossom, the roll of a die, the answer to a riddle. You take another sip, the wine sharp now, your stomach full of goose and honey cakes, your heart caught in the rhythm of drums and laughter. The games blur into the music, into the flirtation, into the scent of melting cones. And then, as though the night needs to prove it can climb higher still, a guest stands to recite verses, voice steady despite the wine. Poetry unfurls into the air, and the crowd falls silent, not from boredom, but from reverence. The games have ended, but another kind of performance is just beginning. The laughter softens into a hush as the nobleman clears his throat, swaying just enough to betray the wine coursing through his veins. The harpists pluck a gentler line, the drummers fade to a heartbeat, and suddenly the room is a stage, the air heavy with anticipation. He begins to recite, his voice low and deliberate, and you find yourself leaning forward as though the words themselves were threads pulling you closer. The poetry is lush, full of metaphors drawn from the Nile, the lotus, the falcon's flight. His phrases wander between admiration for a woman's eyes and solemn reminders that life is as fleeting as dew on morning reeds. You feel the crowd shift with him, giggles at his playful rhymes, sighs at his laments about mortality. This is no mere party trick. For the Egyptians, poetry was a currency of wit and a measure of refinement. To speak well was to live well. What surprises you, though, is how intimate it feels. These verses are not the sterile hymns etched on temple walls. They're raw, full of longing and laughter, confessions meant for ears in the moment, not chisels in eternity. One guest teases him afterwards, saying, "Your words are smoother than the oil on your wig." The room bursts into laughter, but the poet only bows slightly, accepting the jab as applause in disguise. And then, as though the evening craves balance, another guest rises, not with love poetry, but with something heavier. His lines speak of death, of the afterlife, of how even kings crumble to dust while the Nile flows on indifferent. The room quiets further, the playful hum slipping into contemplation. You feel a chill despite the warm torches, because it's impossible not to imagine your own body one day wrapped in linen, forgotten beneath sand while the river carries on. Yet here's the twist. This mingling of desire and mortality wasn't considered strange. For Egyptians, love and death were two sides of the same papyrus sheet. To flirt was to affirm life, to laugh was to mock the shadows, and to drink was to cheat time for one more night. A noblewoman murmurs, "We dance so that the tomb waits more patiently." And you shiver at the blunt truth tucked inside her smile. Historians still debate whether these banquets lean more toward philosophy or performance. Were the nobles truly meditating on the fragility of life, or just enjoying the melodrama of their own voices? Perhaps both. Maybe the line between sincerity and performance blurred when wine flowed freely and the gods were invoked with every verse. You notice, too, that the audience plays its part. They nod at the profound lines, laugh at the playful ones, and whisper to one another when the speaker falters. This isn't passive listening, it's communal storytelling. Even the servants pause, jars in hand, caught in the rhythm of the words. For a moment, hierarchy bends, and everyone is bound together by syllables rising like incense in the air. One guest, younger and bolder, tries his hand at a riddle poem. What can be held but never owned, kissed but never kept? The crowd shouts guesses. Shadow song. Youth. But his sly grin holds until someone finally blurts. A moment. The applause is thunderous, not just for the cleverness, but because everyone feels the weight of it. Moments slip even as you grasp them, like the night itself sliding steadily toward dawn. And yet, despite all this gravitas, humor never truly leaves. Someone jokes that death will have to wait its turn because the goose bones alone might bury them tonight. Another quips that the gods themselves must be jealous of the honey cakes. The crowd laughs again, tension easing, as if reminding themselves that philosophy is best swallowed with wine and sweetness. You find yourself oddly comforted. The mingling of flirtation, poetry, and philosophy feels strangely familiar, like the late-night conversations you've had after a few glasses of something strong, when humor melts into confessions and confessions spiral into existential musings. You realize the nobles weren't so different after all. They, too, used words to stretch the night a little longer, to make joy heavier and sorrow lighter. The harpists strike up once more, this time blending music with the lingering verses, and the mood softens again. The poets sit down, flushed and satisfied, while the crowd turns their eyes elsewhere. Your own gaze follows, and you notice the servants moving more deliberately now, whispering as they pass, carrying more than just trays. Secrets, glances, and rumors are shifting through the room like invisible currents. The poetry may be finished, but the storytelling has only changed form. The rhythm of the party hums along, but your attention drifts to the edges of the room, to the ones who glide in and out of the circle without drawing too much notice. The servants. They carry trays, refill goblets, replace cushions, mop up wine spills before they stain the reed mats. On the surface, they are invisible. Yet the longer you watch, the clearer it becomes. These figures in plain linen control the very pulse of the evening. One slips past you, balancing a tray of figs, and you hear the soft exchange of whispers, 2 words at most, but sharp enough to make the nobleman he's serving glance nervously toward the other side of the room. Another bows low, presenting wine, yet lingers long enough to murmur something that makes his mistress stifle a laugh. It's subtle, delicate, but unmistakable. The servants are not just background, they are conduits, carrying gossip and secrets as easily as they carry bread and goose. It makes sense. They see everything. Who shares glances, who drinks more than they should, who mutters bitterly under their breath when a rival lands a lotus toss perfectly. You realize that while nobles strut, preen, and perform, the servants are keeping score in silence. And tomorrow morning, when memories blur and heads pound, it's the servants who will remember exactly who said what. You chuckle at the thought. They were the ancient world's social media, minus the filters. One detail strikes you as almost comic. Some guests seem to forget the servants even exist, talking freely as though no one can hear them. But you see the glint in the servant's eye, the slight smile at the corner of his lips. He files it away, no doubt. And while historians still debate how much influence these invisible observers truly wielded, You can't help but imagine the quiet power of someone who hears more than anyone else in the room. The party itself even relies on them for its magic. Who do you think replaced the incense cones as they melted down wigs? Or adjusted the lamps when the room grew smoky? Who carried away empty amphorae and slipped in fresh ones before the nobles noticed? They kept the illusion of endless abundance alive. Without them, the gold would look gaudy, the wine would sour, and the music would feel hollow. And then, just when you're convinced their role is purely practical, you spot something curious. A young servant drops a folded scrap of papyrus near a noblewoman, who picks it up without hesitation, reading it under the rim of her goblet. Her lips twitch in the faintest smile before she tucks it into her sash. You blink, wondering if you just witnessed an ancient version of passing notes in class. The noblewoman glances across the room, her eyes locking with someone who wasn't paying attention to her a moment ago, but is now. The servants move like shadows, but the shadows have teeth. Rivalries flare quietly at the edges of the feast. A noble spits something bitter after too much wine, and you see the servant lean just close enough to catch it. Later, that same servant whispers to another guest as he pours the goblet full again. It spreads like ripples in water. What was private becomes rumor, and what was rumor becomes the evening's entertainment. The funny part? No one seems to mind. In fact, they seem to expect it. Maybe that's the thrill, knowing that every joke, every flirtation, every grumble could be overheard and reshaped before the night is done. It adds a spice sharper than cinnamon to the air. You think about it and smile. Every good party has a grapevine, and here in Egypt, it's literal. Yet there's also unease beneath the glitter. The servant's whispers can soothe, but they can also wound. A careless word might end up in the wrong ear. A glance might become a scandal. Some nobles shift uncomfortably, glancing at the servants as though weighing whether to trust them or fear them. The truth is, both are correct. These quiet figures know more than they should, and their silence is worth more than gold. Historians still puzzle over how much freedom servants had at these gatherings. Were they strictly controlled, or did they exploit their invisibility to shape outcomes? The evidence is murky, but watching them tonight, you'd swear they held more sway than the jewels dripping from their masters' necks. After all, power often belongs to those who speak softly and go unseen. You sip your wine, suddenly more cautious about every word in your mouth. The party is still dazzling, but now you see another layer, the invisible threads pulled by those who never sit on the cushions, who never raise their voices in song. And just as you notice this, laughter spikes at the center of the room, louder, sharper. A noble has raised his cup not for poetry or riddles this time, but for something far more pointed: talk of politics. The laughter that had been bubbling from the games and gossip turns a shade heavier as the noble raises his cup. His voice is smooth, practiced, a little too polished for casual chatter. The harp strings quiver, the drums pause for breath, and you feel the room shift. Everyone leans in just slightly, as though instinctively bracing for words that matter more than jokes about goose fat or clumsy lotus tosses. He speaks of the pharaoh first, his reign, his glory, his generosity. Standard party fare, the kind of thing you might say about a boss at an office party, just loud enough for the HR intern to hear. But then the words slide, just so, into talk of taxes, of land, of who controls the irrigation dikes along the eastern branch of the Nile. And suddenly you realize, this isn't flattery anymore. It's politics, hidden in the sweet haze of wine. Around you, nobles chuckle and nod, pretending this is still harmless conversation. But their eyes tell a different story, calculating, worry, sharp as coal-lined daggers. One man swirls his wine absent-mindedly, though you catch the tension in his jaw. Another laughs too loudly, covering discomfort with bravado. It's a dance, not unlike the flirtations from earlier, except here the stakes aren't kisses but land, influence, maybe survival. The irony makes you grin. These feasts, supposedly about joy and pleasure, are also the perfect arena for scheming. No stiff council chamber, no rigid formalities, just cushions, wine, and enough noise to blur the edges of dangerous words. A toast becomes a proposal. A joke becomes an alliance. A riddle becomes a warning. Historians still debate whether these banquets were primarily social or political, but sitting here you'd bet they were both. Every sip of wine a lubricant for deals struck in the shadows. One guest leans toward another and murmurs about new trade routes. The words are soft, but you can hear the excitement in them. Another warns that a rival family has been spending too much time at the temple of Ammonius. The implications hang heavy, though they're delivered with a smile. And then there are the quiet accusations. Who's hoarding grain? Who's skimming from temple offerings? Who's been whispering a little too closely to foreign merchants? The wine makes it sound like gossip, but the weight in the room tells you it's ammunition. You can't help but imagine how these conversations might unfold after the feast. Would a man wake tomorrow regretting his loose tongue? Would a rival wake with a plan sharpened by what he overheard tonight? The walls of this banquet hall may not have ears, but the servants do, and the nobles know it. Their words ripple outward like dropped pebbles in the Nile, small now, waves tomorrow. Yet even here, humor sneaks in. One noble toasts to fewer crocodiles in our canals, and the crowd erupts in laughter, though the subtext is clear. Crocodiles are rivals, dangerous and always lurking where you least expect them. Another raises his cup and declares, "May the vizier's tax collectors forget my village entirely." The joke is met with knowing groans, the kind that mean everyone's been there. The wine makes it safe to laugh at problems too sharp to face sober. Still, there's a current of unease under the merriment. You notice a woman sitting slightly apart, listening more than she speaks. Her eyes move from one noble to another, calculating silently, and you realize she's gathering information like a fisherman pulling in a net. Tomorrow, she might use these fragments to her advantage, or to someone else's downfall. It hits you that these banquets were arenas of survival, where power shifted not with swords or chariots but with whispered words between gulps of wine. Egyptians may not have invented the cocktail party, but they perfected its darker art, politics dressed in perfume. And just when the tension seems ready to crack, a priestly voice rises above the din. He lifts his goblet not with sly jokes but with solemn reverence, invoking the gods as witnesses. The party, he insists, is not only about pleasure or politics, it is also a sacred act. Wine, laughter, love, all gifts from the divine. The mood shivers again, tipping from strategy into something older, weightier. Religion has entered the room. The priest's voice glides through the air, smoother than the harp strings, and the torches seem to bow with the weight of his words. Guests straighten their spines, laughter softening to polite chuckles, as though suddenly reminded that they sit not only in a noble's hall but under the gaze of gods who miss nothing. The shift is subtle but absolute. The atmosphere tilts from scheming to solemnity, from flirtation to faith. He begins with Osiris, the green-skinned god of rebirth, whose own myth is soaked in wine and resurrection. To drink, the priest insists, is not only to delight in life but to echo Osiris's eternal cycle. Every sip is a tiny ritual, A reminder that death is not the end but a pause before renewal. You glance at your goblet and feel its weight differently now, not just fermented grapes, but liquid myth, a tether to immortality disguised as a party favor. The nobles nod with practiced reverence, though you can see some of them suppressing smirks behind their cups. Devotion and indulgence make out bedfellows, yet here they lie side by side. Wine is both sacrament and scandal, both divine nectar and drunken laughter. The contradiction doesn't bother them, it excites them. After all, who wouldn't want their vices sanctified by the gods? The harpists strike a softer tune, almost hymn-like, and one of the dancers returns, not with teasing gestures this time, but with measured steps, arms raised like wings. She embodies Hathor now, goddess of joy, music, and love, her movements less flirtation than invocation. Guests bow their heads slightly, but their eyes still gleam with fascination. You realize that religion here isn't something cordoned off in temples. It bleeds into life, into wine cups and banquet halls, into laughter that suddenly feels like prayer. The priest chants a blessing over the feast, sprinkling drops of wine onto the floor as an offering. The liquid seeps into the reed mats, staining them like small red blossoms. It's a simple gesture, but it stills the room for a heartbeat. Even the servants pause, amphory poised mid-air, as though afraid to break the spell. You sense the reverence, real or performed, it doesn't matter. The gods are listening, or at least everyone wants to believe they are. And yet, irreverence slips back in almost immediately. A noble mutters, just loud enough for his circle to hear. "If the gods want my wine, they'll have to wrestle it from me." His companions stifle their laughter behind goblets, shoulders shaking. It's the same energy as cracking a joke during Mass, blasphemous, but irresistible. You hide your grin, realizing that even in ancient Egypt, faith and mockery danced as partners. Historians still argue about the sincerity of this mingling. Were nobles truly pious in these moments, or was it theater, a convenient excuse to indulge under divine cover? Some scholars point to tomb inscriptions that show banquets painted like rituals, suggesting deep belief. Others argue that the religion was as much performance as devotion. Watching this room, you'd say both were true. Belief and spectacle swirl together like wine and water, inseparable once poured. The priest shifts to Isis, protector and mother, whose magic reassembled Osiris's body. He speaks of her tears as the floodwaters of the Nile, nurturing fields and vineyards alike. Suddenly, the wine in your cup feels doubly sacred. It is Osiris reborn, Isis weeping, Hathor laughing, all at once. You sip, half in reverence, half in curiosity, wondering if you've just swallowed a prayer. And then the moment passes. A noble coughs too loudly, another drops a bracelet with a metallic clatter, and the solemn air cracks open like a jar lid. Conversation seeps back in, hesitant at first, then louder. The gods have been acknowledged, placated, maybe even entertained. Now the mortals return to their games, their flirtations, their politics. But not without a trace of the divine left behind. You feel it, faint as incense, an invisible reminder that every laugh, every glance, every sip is somehow touched by gods who approve, or at least tolerate, such excess. The priest himself smiles now, sipping from his goblet like any other guest, the boundary between sacred and profane melting as quickly as the perfumed cones atop wigs. And just as the party exhales, relieved of its brief restraint, you hear a ripple of whispers, louder than before, edged with mischief. Rumors take flight again, darting from lip to lip, fluttering like restless birds in the torchlight. Flirtations may have been blessed, But that doesn't mean jealousy has been banished. In fact, the whispers sound juicier than ever. The hush of prayer dissolves, and in its place rises the susurrus of whispers. You catch it first at the edge of your hearing, like the rustle of reeds in the Nile breeze. Then it grows, weaving through the hall until laughter and song mingle with something sharper. Rumors. Jealousies. The ancient equivalent of side eyes and subtweets, only here it's passed on breath warm with wine. You notice a noblewoman glance across the cushions, her smile stretched a little too tightly. The man she's staring at leans close to someone else, whispering into her ear. It might be harmless, just a joke, maybe a compliment, but the noblewoman's fingers tighten around her goblet until the clay creaks. She laughs anyway, a sound brittle as a snapped reed. The others pretend not to see, but you feel the tension pulse like the drumbeats earlier in the night. A servant slips by, carrying figs, and you swear you see him smirk. He's heard it all before. Perhaps he's even the one who carried the whisper to the jealous woman in the first place. You realize how easily affection here can sour into suspicion, how quickly admiration turns into envy. The jewels glitter, the perfumes flow, but underneath, hearts burn with the same old rivalries that have always made parties messy. One rumor drifts close enough for you to catch. They say his vineyard doesn't produce nearly enough for all that wine. Where does he really get it? A scandal cloaked in sweetness, delivered with a sip of honeyed drink. Another follows. Did you hear she visited the temple gardens without her husband? Gasps, laughter, then a fan snapped shut too quickly to be casual. You chuckle softly. Ancient Egyptians might have lacked smartphones, but gossip traveled just as fast. Sometimes it's funny. A noble quips that his rival's wig must be stuffed with straw because it sits too high on his head, and the table roars with laughter. The rival laughs too, but you notice his jaw tightening, his hand clutching at the wig as if to defend its honor. The joke will fade tonight, but tomorrow morning it may linger like a splinter. Sometimes, though, the rumors cut deeper. A nobleman at the far end of the room raises his voice just enough to be heard. Some people toast Osiris while quietly plotting against him. The words are vague, almost poetic, but everyone knows they carry an edge. Silence ripples, followed by forced laughter. You feel the room teeter between amusement and unease, and you wonder, was it a joke? Or a warning? Historians still debate whether banquets were safe havens for free speech or dangerous traps where one careless word could end a career, or a life. And then there's the jealousy woven into flirtation. Earlier glances turn sharper now. A woman tosses her lotus blossom toward one man's goblet but keeps glancing at another. The first man drinks with a forced grin, while the second smirks knowingly. It's a triangle written in petals and wine, and the whole room seems to know the script. You laugh quietly to yourself. Who needs soap operas when the nobles provide them live, perfumed and gilded? The funniest part? Some nobles try to hide their envy under layers of courtesy, only to fail spectacularly. You watch as a man compliments another's necklace. Ah, lapis lazuli, how radiant! While clearly gritting his teeth. His smile is so forced it might as well be carved in stone. The necklace owner beams, oblivious or pretending to be, basking in a glow brighter than any torch. You can't help but think, humans haven't changed. Complimenting while seething inside? Timeless. You sip your wine, letting the sweetness dull the edge of the room. The laughter returns swelling, but now you hear the layers beneath it. Joy on the surface, rivalry underneath. Every toast carries both warmth and warning. Every smile hides teeth. And through it all, The servants glide silently, feeding the fire with whispered embers, careful never to burn themselves. The night feels thick now, not just with wine and perfume but with the weight of emotions barely contained. Desire, envy, rivalry, affection, they swirl together like sediment at the bottom of a jar. You lean back, exhaling slowly, and glance toward the musicians. The harpist plucks a faster tune, the drum quickens, and you realize the party is shifting again. The laughter, the whispers, the jealous glances, all of it is about to burst into something louder, wilder. The banquet is reaching its fever pitch. The nobles are drunker, the dancers bolder, the jokes sharper. You brace yourself, because the night is about to tip over the edge into pure chaos. The room trembles with noise now, as though the walls themselves are drunk. The harpists pluck faster, the drums thunder louder, and the dancers spin so wildly their anklets jingle like 1,000 tiny bells. The nobles, flushed with wine and rivalry, lean into the frenzy without hesitation. It is the moment when restraint, subtlety, and whispered games dissolve into a tidal wave of noise, laughter, and reckless abandon. You feel it in your own body, your shoulders lighter, your pulse sinking with the beat. Guests no longer sip, they gulp, goblets clattering onto reed mats, wine spilling across fingers and laps. A nobleman howls with laughter at his own joke, though no one else heard it, and another topples backward onto cushions, laughing so hard he can't breathe. The air is thick with perfume and sweat, heavy as the midsummer heat outside, and you're not sure whether you're lightheaded from wine or from the riot of sensations. The flirtations that once danced delicately now erupt openly. A woman grabs her partner's hand, pulling him into a twirl that nearly knocks over a tray of figs. Another man declares loudly that he'll marry the next person who can catch his lotus blossom midair. He tosses it, wild and crooked, and it lands on the bald head of a priest, who, to his credit, laughs harder than anyone else. The whole room erupts, and you laugh too, wiping tears from your eyes. Who knew ancient Egypt could feel like a college frat party with better jewelry? Somewhere in the chaos, someone starts singing. Off-key, too loud, words slurred, but the crowd cheers anyway. Another joins in, then another, until the entire hall echoes with drunken chants. You can't catch the lyrics, but the tone is unmistakable, defiance. Against silence, against boredom, against the long shadow of death. For tonight, at least, they will laugh so loudly that even the gods might cover their ears. And yet, in the middle of all this joy, you spot cracks. A nobleman stumbles, his wig slipping sideways, and the laughter turns sharp, almost cruel. Another collapses onto a servant, spilling wine down both their chests. The servant's expression remains stone calm, but you see his eyes flash for a second, anger, amusement, maybe both. Someone else shouts too loudly about a rival's debts, and for a heartbeat the room stiffens. Then someone jokes about goose fat again, and the tension shatters into another roar of laughter. Historians still debate whether these descriptions of drunken banquets were exaggerated moral warnings or accurate snapshots of excess. Were nobles truly this wild, or were scribes painting caricatures to scold them? Watching this scene unfold, you'd swear the truth leans toward excess. Human beings, given wine, music, and a captive audience, rarely settle for moderation. You sip again, your own head swirling, and notice how the boundaries blur. Dancers mingle with guests, priests raise goblets, servants smirk in corners. The hierarchy softens under the weight of intoxication. For a few hours, everyone is simply human, sweaty, laughing, vulnerable, ridiculous. You almost envy it, even as you know tomorrow morning will bring regrets as sticky as the honey cakes. The funniest sight comes when a noblewoman tries to stand gracefully, only to trip on her own pleated skirt. She falls into a pile of cushions, laughing so hard she doesn't bother getting up. Her bracelets jangle as she waves for more wine, declaring, "The gods themselves couldn't rise after such sweetness." The crowd howls in agreement. You can't help but grin. It's the same kind of messy joy you've seen at weddings, birthdays, any place where people forget themselves for a while. But the chaos is exhausting too. The air grows thick, torch smoke stinging your eyes, the clatter of voices and music crowding your ears. The laughter feels louder, sharper, almost fraying at the edges. You sense the party can't stay at this fever pitch forever. Something has to give. And as you glance around, you see nobles slumping against cushions, dancers slowing their steps, servants wiping up puddles of wine that smell sour in the heat. The night is peaking, burning bright before it flickers. The chaos is glorious, but you can already feel the shift coming, the fall after the frenzy. Soon, the torches will sputter lower, the goblets will lie empty, and the echoes of laughter will give way to silence. The frenzy ebbs like the Nile after flood season, leaving behind puddles of laughter, spilled wine, and the heavy silence of exhaustion. The music falters first, the harpist's fingers slowing, the drummers dragging their palms lazily across skins, notes stretching long and languid until they fade into nothing. You feel the absence in your chest, like a heartbeat that suddenly stumbles. Guests slump into cushions, their once pristine linen crumpled and stained. A goblet lies overturned, soaking the reed mats with sticky sweetness, while someone snores unashamedly in the corner. The room that once roared with laughter now hums with sighs and murmurs soft as lullabies. You realize this is the part no tomb painting ever shows, the aftermath, when splendor droops into weariness. The torchlight burns lower, smoke curling upward in tired spirals. The perfume cones atop wigs have melted completely, leaving trails of oil down necks and shoulders. What was once intoxicating is now cloying, heavy as damp wool. You wrinkle your nose, and for the first time, you envy the peasants outside under the clean night air. A noblewoman adjusts her necklace, its golden petals ask you, her eyes half-lidded. She forces a smile at the man beside her, though her laugh comes too slow, too hollow. Across the room, a young man rubs his temple, muttering that the gods are spinning the ceiling. Another tries to stand, wobbling dangerously before collapsing back onto the cushions, greeted with half-hearted chuckles. The wild energy of an hour ago has turned into sluggish amusement, like embers glowing faintly where flames once roared. It's not just exhaustion, it's consequence. You see it in the sticky hands, the sour smell of wine gone stale, the sharp edge of regret in some eyes. Flirtations that seemed daring earlier now look awkward in the cold torchlight. Promises whispered with wine-thick tongues weigh heavier, their echoes less romantic and more binding. You think to yourself, history might remember these feasts as glittering, joyous affairs, but the hangovers, emotional and otherwise, must have been legendary. One noble coughs, loud enough to jolt the room, and mutters that the wine was stronger than the gods intended. Another laughs softly, but the sound dies quickly. The fatigue is collective now, like a tide pulling everyone downward. Even the servants move slower, their shoulders sagging, though they still sweep, refill, and gather plates with tireless precision. You admire them, wondering how they manage to clean chaos with the same quiet grace that sustained it. Historians sometimes debate whether these parties ended in ritual closing or simply burned out when guests collapsed. The evidence is thin, but sitting here you'd bet on the latter. There's no grand finale, no curtain call. Just humans, rich and perfumed, slouching into the same exhaustion that any party brings. Luxury doesn't spare you from fatigue. It just makes the fall look prettier. And yet, there's a strange tenderness in the scene. A woman leans her head on her friend's shoulder, giggling softly as they share a final figure. A man drapes his robe over another who has fallen asleep on the floor, too proud to leave but too drunk to stand. For all the envy, rivalry, and politics, the night ends with simple gestures of care. It reminds you that even gilded nobles are still just people, messy, tired, vulnerable, yearning for comfort. You shift on your cushion, the reed mat rough against your skin, and glance toward the doorway. Beyond the flickering torches lies the night sky, dark and infinite. The faint sound of crickets drifts in, startlingly gentle compared to the chaos inside. You feel the pull of that darkness, the promise of silence after so much noise. The party is ending, not with a bang but with a sigh. And as the nobles fade into murmurs and half-sleep, you know the final act awaits outside these walls, where the air is cool, the stars bright, and the echoes of laughter dissolve into memory. You step past the last clusters of nobles, their laughter now reduced to faint murmurs, and slip into the cool embrace of the night. The air outside feels shockingly crisp after the heavy perfume and torch smoke inside, like a deep breath you didn't know you'd been craving. Above, the stars stretch endlessly, scattered across the dark sky as if the gods themselves had spilled their jewelry. The moon hangs low, silver and solemn, its light brushing against the sandstone walls that held all that noise only moments ago. Behind you, the banquet hall exhales its final sighs, cups clinking weakly, someone groaning about too much wine, the faint scratch of a harp string plucked without conviction. But out here, the world is quiet. The scent of lotus drifts from the garden pond nearby, carried by the breeze, clean and cool against the residue of smoke still clinging to your linen. You close your eyes and let it wash over you, the contrast so sharp it almost feels holy. You walk slowly across the courtyard, your sandals whispering against stone. The torches burn lower, casting long shadows that stretch like ghosts toward the desert. In the distance you hear the Nile itself, steady, eternal, carrying on as it always has, indifferent to feasts and flirtations, rivalries and regrets. It reminds you that all of this, jewels, wine, laughter, whispers, exists only in borrowed time. Tomorrow, the nobles will wake with headaches, servants will scrub reed mats, and rumors will slither into daylight. But the river will flow, steady and unbothered. You pause at the threshold of silence and memory. The night has peeled back the glitter to show you what lies beneath, that these parties were not only about indulgence, but about being seen, remembered, and, just for a night, defying the weight of mortality. For all the envy, flirtation, and scheming, the core was simple: to laugh, to eat, to dance, to make the shadows retreat. Historians still debate the meaning of it all. Were the wine parties acts of devotion, disguised politics, or pure hedonism? Maybe all three. Maybe that's why they linger in imagination, their truth as slippery as spilled wine, impossible to pin down, yet unforgettable. You realize you've been watching more than a banquet. You've been watching humanity itself, dressed in linen and lapis, but still just as messy, tender, and restless as it is today. Your steps slow as the torches behind you fade, the hum of insects rising in their place. The stars above blur slightly, your eyelids growing heavier with each breath of cool air. The laughter of the nobles still echoes faintly in your ears, softened now, like a lullaby from centuries away. You imagine their voices fading into the sand, carried away by the same wind that brushes gently across your cheek. The garden pond ripples quietly, and for a moment you think of the lotus blossoms drifting across its surface, fragile, fleeting, yet beautiful while they last. Just like the party. Just like the night. Just like life itself. And as you stand there, letting the silence seep into your bones, the images blur. The banquet hall, the jewels, the laughter, the wine, all fading into the background hum of the night. You let the noise dissolve, the colors soften, the edges blur, until all that's left is stillness. Your breath slows. Your body grows heavy. The stars above blur further, stretching into a quiet haze. You let go of the noise, the warmth, the chaos. You let it all slip into shadow, into silence, into rest. And with a final whisper, the night cradles you gently, carrying you toward sleep. End of script. Sweet dreams.